A 12-year-old boy steps into a crumbling gym in Havana. The paint is peeling off the walls. There's no air conditioning, no fancy equipment, just a worn-out heavy bag swinging from a rusted chain. He wraps his hands in frayed strips of cloth, plants his feet, and starts throwing punches. No gloves, no headgear, no coach barking over his shoulder, and in 10 years, this exact boy could be the best boxer on the entire planet. Not might be, will be. By the end of this video, you'll know the 3 things Cuban parents and Cuban culture do to build fighters like him. And the third one is the one almost everyone outside Cuba gets completely backwards. Because here's what makes no sense. This tiny island of just 11 million people has produced more Olympic boxing champions than almost any nation on Earth. Country after country shows up to the Olympics with 100 times the money, the population, and the resources, and country after country gets beaten by Cuba. And then it gets stranger. Cuba banned professional boxing for decades. There was no big payday waiting. No world title belts, no millions of dollars. The greatest fighters this island ever made were offered fortunes to leave, and they looked at the money and said no. So how does a poor country with no pro scene keep building the most feared boxers in the world? It starts long before any of them ever step into a real ring. It starts with how Cuban parents raise their kids. The first thing you have to understand is that in Cuba, boxing isn't a hobby a child picks up one day. It's in the streets before a kid can even read. Walk through any neighborhood in Havana or Santiago and you'll see it everywhere. Little kids shadow boxing on cracked sidewalks. Fathers crouching down to show their sons how to keep their hands up and their chin tucked. Old men sitting on plastic chairs, calling out corrections to boys who aren't even their own. Boxing in Cuba is what football is in Brazil. It's constant, it's free, and it's woven into daily life. A Cuban kid never has to ask permission to start boxing because the moment he can walk, he's already surrounded by it. And that early total immersion means most Cuban boys have been throwing punches for years before a kid in another country has even laced up gloves for the first time. But exposure alone doesn't explain it, because plenty of countries love boxing and still can't produce champions. The real difference is the system that catches these kids. Cuba runs a national network of sports schools, and they start scouting children as young as 8 or 9 years old. Trained coaches walk straight into ordinary working-class neighborhoods, watch the kids play and move and scrap, and they pick out the ones with raw natural talent. A boy who throws one clean, sharp punch on a street corner can be pulled into a real structured program within weeks. And here's the part that changes everything. It costs the family absolutely nothing. The state pays for all of it. The coaching, the gym, the equipment, the food, the travel to competitions, every last bit. In most countries on Earth, raw talent gets wasted because the parents simply can't afford to develop it. Lessons cost money, gyms cost money, travel costs money. In Cuba, that entire wall is removed. If the talent is there, the system finds it and feeds it, no matter how poor the family is. So, that's the first pillar. Talent is hunted down early, and nothing about a family's bank account is allowed to stop it. But finding talented kids is only the beginning, because what Cuba does with them next is where the real magic happens. The second pillar is an almost obsessive focus on fundamentals. Cuban boxing has a style, and if you've ever watched it, you recognize it instantly. It's smooth, it's relaxed. The fighters barely look like they're trying, and that is exactly the point. While young boxers in other countries are taught to swing hard and look impressive for the crowd, Cuban kids spend years, and I mean literal years, on footwork, balance, distance, and defense before anyone cares how hard they can hit. Coaches drill the same small movements thousands upon thousands of times until they stop being moves the kid thinks about and become pure reflex. The philosophy behind it is brutally simple. Hit and don't get hit. A Cuban fighter would rather make you miss 100 punches than trade one reckless swing with you, and that patience isn't something they discover as adults. It's taught from childhood. Parents and coaches reward control instead of aggression. A boy who stays calm and composed under pressure gets praised. A boy who loses his temper and starts brawling gets corrected on the spot. Over years, this builds fighters who are almost impossible to rattle because being calm in a fight is the only thing they've ever known. Think about what that actually means by the numbers. By the time a Cuban boxer is just 15 years old, he has already thrown more clean, technically perfect punches than many professional fighters in other countries throw across their whole careers. He isn't learning how to box anymore. He's already close to a master. He simply hasn't shown the rest of the world yet, but even perfect technique and a free system still don't fully explain the dominance because plenty of countries have good coaches and talented kids. The thing that truly separates Cuba is the third pillar, and it's the one that sounds almost impossible when you first hear it. The third pillar is mindset. Cuban fighters are raised from the start to believe that representing their country means more than any pile of money on earth. And the two greatest names in Cuban boxing history prove it in a way that's almost hard to believe. Teofilo Stevenson was a heavyweight so dominant he won 3 Olympic gold medals across 3 different Olympics. At his peak, he was offered millions of dollars to turn professional and travel to the United States to fight Muhammad Ali, the biggest fight that could possibly exist on the planet at that time. He turned it down. He famously said he would not trade the love of millions of Cubans for all the money in the world. Then came Felix Savon, another 3-time Olympic gold medalist who was reportedly offered around $10 million to fight Mike Tyson. He said no too. Not once, but 3 separate times. Sit with that for a second. These were the best heavyweights alive, offered life-changing generational fortunes, and they walked away from all of it to stay amateur and keep fighting for national pride. That mentality does not appear out of nowhere on the day someone offers you a check. It's poured into Cuban children from the very beginning. Loyalty, discipline, sacrifice, the deep idea that what you represent is bigger than what you personally earn. Parents hand it down like an inheritance, the same way other families pass down a name or a trade. And when a fighter raised on that belief steps into the Olympic ring with his country's flag on his chest, he becomes almost impossible to break. Because he isn't just fighting for himself or for a paycheck. He's fighting for every person who ever raised him, fed him, and corrected his footwork on a cracked sidewalk. So put all 3 pillars together and the mystery finally makes sense. Talent hunted down early and developed completely for free. Fundamentals drilled to absolute perfection over years of patience that other countries simply don't have. And a mindset that genuinely values pride over money, built into kids before they're even old enough to understand it. That exact combination is why a poor island of just 11 million people keeps producing fighters that billion-dollar boxing nations cannot beat, year after year after year. But here's the question worth sitting with, because the story isn't as clean as it used to be. Is any of this still sustainable? In recent years, more and more Cuban fighters have started defecting, leaving the island in the night to chase the professional careers and the money that home will never offer them. The very system that built them into the best in the world has also made them so valuable that the outside world will not stop trying to pull them away. And slowly, it's working. Cuba still wins. Cuba still produces champions who shock the world on the biggest stages. But the cracks are showing now, and the next generation of Cuban kids may grow up in a very different island than the one that forged legends like Stevenson and Savon. Still, for right now, the formula holds. Somewhere in Havana tonight, a kid in a crumbling gym is wrapping his hands in frayed cloth and throwing punches at a worn-out bag with no money, no shortcuts, and no guarantee of anything at all. Just the streets, the system, and a belief passed down from his parents that he was born to be great. And that quiet, broke, determined little starting line might just be the most dangerous one in all of sports. So if you ever wondered why a country with so little keeps beating nations with so much, now you have your answer. It was never about money or facilities or luck. It was about a culture that hands boxing to its children like a birthright, a system that refuses to let poverty waste a single talented kid, and parents who teach their sons that pride is worth more than any fortune. Cuba didn't get lucky. Cuba built its champions on purpose, one barefoot kid on a cracked sidewalk at a time.